Hello, this is the NICU Lived Network, and we are your hosts. I'm Melinda.
I'm Nat.
And I'm Emma. We are all NICU mothers using our lived experience to partner with health professionals to impact research, advocacy, and clinical practice.
Each week we will bring you something new. It could be a topic highlight, the latest in research, a visit to a NICU, or ways in which you can use your lived experience within the NICU to impact change. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi everyone. For this week's episode, we're sharing a small clip from a live webinar titled, What is Consumer-Led Research? Which features our very own Melinda Cruz-Turner, who was a panelist on this webinar. In this clip, Melinda shares some of her journey as a consumer rep over the last 10 years. This has been taken from a series by the White Coats Foundation, which aims to raise awareness about the role of clinical trials in advancing medical science and healthcare. So let's jump straight in.
Melinda is the mother of 3 premature babies and the founder of Australia's largest and leading neonatal consumer group. She's also been a chief investigator on the MRFF-funded WHEAT trial, withholding or continuing enteral feeds during transfusion. And she's also the winner of the inaugural Australian Clinical Trials Alliance Consumer Involvement Award. And she's co-authored more than 16 publications in peer-reviewed journals. But even with all that experience, I know Melinda and I have had some discussions offline.
Yeah.
That baffles her. And I think Melinda's, you've said that you feel a bit confused about where you fit into this, given your experience. And we both kind of agree that consumer-led research tends to imply that, there is a significant level of consumer ownership in the research process from start to finish. So I'm now going to hand over to you. Very much looking forward to you sharing your thoughts and views on this. Thanks, Melinda.
Thank you for having me. And yeah, I agree. We've definitely gone back and forth and trying to see if we can come up with, a definition for either of them. So thank you so much for having me, and welcome to everybody as well. I think Fiona's going to put some slides up, so I'll have a little bit, I guess, of a discussion of where I am, and thank you for that lovely introduction. And then we can go into having the chat. So like you said, I'm the mum of 3 beautiful boys that were all born early. Before that, so I say BC, or before children, I've got a science degree in genetics, and my life was taking a very different path. And then these 3 beautiful boys came along. It was my middle son, Dylan, his birth at 27 weeks. He was resuscitated when he was born, spent 9 weeks in hospital before we brought him home. And just that experience really, I guess, changed the whole agenda of my life. In 2005, a year after he was born, is when I founded Miracle Babies. And originally it was more of like a support group and a way to connect families, because that's what happened when we got discharged from hospital. Felt very disengaged, not a lot of programs, parents, who were going through the same thing. How could we get long-term support for what we had gone through? So then, maybe next slide, Fiona, thank you. So we were kind of plodding along very well as a consumer organisation, and very parent-family program focused. Then in 2012, I got a phone call from this gentleman, Professor William Tano-Morty, a researcher who basically said to me, have you thought about research? And at the time we hadn't. So I thought it was one of those things that was kind of happening. It was doing really well. Knew that in our NICUs, thankfully our babies have access to really high quality care. And it wasn't really the space that we thought we were stepping into. So I actually said to him, why would you need us? And these were the things that he spoke to me about. Was one, that the uptake into trials, particularly in neonatal or perinatal trials, is really quite low. I kind of laughed a little bit and said, yeah, because, it's actually really difficult to, as an adult, you say yes to a trial for yourself, but to actually make that decision for your baby can be quite difficult. He told me it makes sense if you're the patients, it makes sense to involve you and have that discussion, but also that it was policy. So if you just flick to the next slide. So in 2004, in their model framework, the NHMRC actually encouraged the appointment of consumers as decision makers in research. So this was 2004. Like I said, he approached me in 2012. So in the neonatal space, 8 years had gone by since the recommendation and nothing had happened. There had been no consumer involvement, but it wasn't only here. Sorry, next slide. In places like the UK, you know, the same thing, that our research is carried out with or by the public rather than to, about or for them, and that it should be driven by the needs of patients and public, engaged at every stage, and that no funding would be allocated unless consumers have been engaged. So from a policy perspective, moving forward, there was that directive, but was it actually happening? So that's the way that we kind of got connected. And then next slide. Since 2012, and I know, Kristen, you alluded to some of this in your introduction, these are some of the things that I've been really fortunate and grateful and humble to be invited and take part in. So I was appointed as an honorary research associate with NHMRC CTC, and then was put on as a first-time investigator, as an associate investigator on the LIFT trial, which was the first, we don't know if it's the first in the world, but we know it was definitely the first in Australia. From that, joined the PSANS, which is the Perinatal Society of Australia and New Zealand, their Consumer Advisory Panel, their Clinical Trials Executive Committee, and then the Trials Development Committee, also with NHMRC. From that, I was then invited onto another, quite a bit of series of other trials, also as an associate investigator. Through the foundation, we were able to help contribute to, you know, disseminating results of different trials. And then it kind of changed a little bit in terms of our involvement, where now is starting to take a different kind of role. So one of the biggest things that happened, and you can see that's exactly why we won the award, was I helped obtain a waiver of consent for the Torpedo 3060 trial. So this is the amount of oxygen that's given to babies when they're born and being resuscitated. So the reason this was really important was there hadn't been a trial before that where waiver of consent was granted. I actually had to go and present physically to the ethics committee. So to stand up in the room as a parent and you know, give my perspective and be a voice for all those parents on why this trial could offer waiver of consent. And there was many considerations. It's a comparative trial. It's two practices that were already happening. But we did get waiver of consent. So that was the first trial that's happened in Australia, and it's not the last. We've actually been successful in subsequent trials because of this one. And then other involvement, so the FICARE, which is Family Integrated Care, it's a trial that started in Canada, and then Australia and New Zealand also joined that. We led the consumer contribution to that. And then in 2018 was the first time I was appointed as a chief investigator on the wheat trial. And then this year I've also been appointed onto another trial as a chief investigator. As you said, also to date, co-authored 16 publications. So next slide. So for us, and I know that we'll have this discussion, we haven't really made that big distinction between consumer-led and participation. What we wanted to do, taking it further, so we know from 2012 we have made really considerable, I guess, inroads in terms of having consumer involvement, and there are no neonatal trials that happen in Australia that don't have some aspect of parent participation or what it may be involved. And that's from the beginning before it goes into application stage. So what we want to do in our space is that hopefully that we can design and train and educate our patients or our parents as partners. We are looking at almost like the life-saving model where they have a bronze, silver, gold, and hopefully get parents, because it's really hard, like it's really daunting to be able to come into participate in research. From that, create a global registration or a register of parent partners. So that can be twofold, you know, that researchers can actually go to the register and find parents, because that's been a really big thing for us, is like, how do you connect people? And then from that, we're looking at how we can use, and we have used the word here, led, parent and consumer-led priority settings. And the reason that they came about, you can probably take the slides down. so we can chat. So the reason that came about was we held last year in November, it's World Prematurity Month. So we held a series of Facebook Lives, and one of them included our parent reps. So we have consumer reps, and actually having the discussion. And from our perspective, we're really it's like I said, it's humbling and it's amazing that we get the opportunity to take part in research, but then also we have parents that want to actually be part of, the priority setting in terms of questions. We're the ones with the lived experience. So we're the ones that know in real life terms, these are the things that are happening with our children. Why aren't those things being studied? So we actually had those kind of discussions. And for us, when it comes to, I guess, this topic, like I said with you, Christine, is the words interchangeable? In terms of, we've always used the words consumer participation, involvement, engagement. When we talk about it, we think that consumer-led would be something that you're involved in every stage in terms of planning, developing, educating across all those stages rather than individual components. So yeah, I don't know. I'm really happy that we're actually having this discussion. And I think part of the biggest thing is, do we actually know what consumers want? How involved do they actually want to be? When we talk about it with our consumers, do they actually want to be the ones that are doing the doing? For me, when I'm invited onto a project, even I showed that we won that award, and ACTA have called it an involvement award for that reason. It's always been me taking part in someone else's project. So it's being led meant that we're the ones that are actually leading the entire project and inviting people onto that. Or is it more about having that involvement across the scope? Because the importance to parents may not be actually doing the doing, but the outcome. What questions being asked and what the outcome is.
Adding that consumer-led priority to your framework, was that consumer-driven? Was that a request by consumers? And so did they did you get any information from them about what they meant when they were talking about consumer-led research?
Well, I think because it's priority setting, it's more about being able to create the topic that gets researched.
Right.
Yeah. Because that's where they come from. And it was really interesting that a lot of what they talk about, so say, for example, in a NICU, when you look at the research in terms of how much oxygen do you give a baby when they're born, that's not a question a parent would come up with. That's definitely a researcher kind of question. But when you look at long-term developmental delays, what's happening, when children are going to school, all of those kind of things, that's really hard, I guess, for a researcher to then come up with those kind of questions, but that matters to families, that matters to parents. So then that becomes research that is really applicable and has real life benefits, but those kind of questions can only come from the people who are living it. So I think from our point of view with families is, they want that opportunity, but I don't know, and that's what I was saying, what do consumers actually want? I don't know if they want to have, their hands in the clay and actually be running all the parts of the research. There is kind of that aspect that the researchers are the experts, but being able to be part of the discussion, be at the table, help set the questions, and that we can, help be part of that solution.
And I think, being part of developing those research questions and prioritizing those questions can be considered consumer involvement. I mean, that's something we talk about as part of consumer involvement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Becoming consumer-led at that point.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that small clip from the webinar. Don't forget, you can watch the full webinar on the White Coats Foundation website. And if you're someone who has benefited from a clinical trial, the White Coats Foundation would love to hear from you as part of their Your Voice, Your Story campaign. All you need to do is jump on their website. We'll pop in the link in the description box below, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
That's a wrap on another episode of the NICU Live Network. Thanks for joining us today. To stay connected, please make sure you're following us on social media and have joined our Facebook group.
And if you found value in this episode, please share, like, or comment.
We'll see you on the next episode.